Sahani, Giza, Kiboko. That's how stories were told to me when I was young, and it seems like I wasn't alone. This was in addition to the conventional once upon a time or hapo zamani za kale. My hapo zamani za kale began when I used to sit in my father's Toyota Celeste on a Sunday afternoon and listen to KBC English service. Then there were only two radio stations, the English service and the Kiswahili service. So my Sunday afternoons were spent at 2 o'clock trying to tune into the English service to listen to Mama Inosi's story time. If I missed it on Sunday, I made sure I'd catch the repeat on Tuesday night. Mama Inosi's beautiful, soft tones would tell many fascinating tones that would transport me to many, many lands that I'd never been to. Little did I know that my love for radio and storytelling was being seeded at that time. I am a journalist and a storyteller at heart. And for almost the 6 years that I worked at the BBC, I was given the privilege of telling people stories. I called myself a custodian of people's stories. And I made sure every time I told their stories, I told them truthfully, with dignity and respect. I strongly believe that I am the journalist and the writer that I am now, thanks to the people who let me tell their stories. And I'll share with you some of these stories. It was this group of people in Molo, the Rift Valley, who said no to politicians because they were sick and tired of being used as political pawns to instigate violence amongst themselves. I also had the privilege of going to northern Kenya, to what was then, I think, the 4th largest town in Kenya, the Dadaab refugee camp, where we covered the hunger crisis that afflicted not just northern Kenya, but the Horn of Africa. This story broke me. It broke me because I had never seen such poverty and such hunger in my life. During the day, I can tell you, I had to detach myself from the story and just covered people walking. People used to walk for 2 weeks from Somalia to get to Dadaab. This particular family only had a kettle, tea, water, and sugar. They were a day away from Dadaab. We did that the whole day. In the evening, I had to file my report to London, telling them what I'd seen. But along the way, during the interview, I broke down. Some journalists do have a heart. This story was just one of those stories I was so proud to share and to tell the world, because it showed a human face to a crisis that seemed so far away from my comfort in Nairobi. But it wasn't all bad. One morning, I was lucky enough, to go down to a bus station in Nairobi to meet this group of social activists that were giving yellow balloons to commuters. If you know anything about Nairobi traffic, by the time you get to town, you're just tired. But people were befuddled, were shocked that this group of young people were giving people yellow balloons to start the day. It was such a joy to see people go to work smiling and with a balloon in their hand. I was also fortunate enough to travel to Burundi and to many other countries in the continent. Countries like Burundi are known for their conflict, the ethnic cleansing that has taken there so many times. But I was able to learn about their culture, interview a president or two, if this works, I do clean up pretty well once in a while. But it was an honor to be there. They were celebrating 50 years of independence. And I was also lucky enough to go to Liberia and meet up with their future. My university professor, Sean Street at Bournemouth University, used to say that the stories that are created in our minds thanks to audio are a lot more compelling, vivid, and creative. How many of us were fortunate enough to have bedtime stories? Yeah? Good number of you, yeah. Or still give bedtime stories to your children. Don't you love the way how they put kids to sleep, or even how they put me to sleep? And it made our dreams a lot more colorful. Another question for you. How many of you hate story adaptation, movie adaptations movie adaptations of books? There was a hand already there so quickly, yeah. I'll tell you my experience. I used to love Asterix, and I still do, the comic. And I remember when the first animation came out, not the recent one, but the first animation came out, I was so excited. But I was so disappointed because their accents weren't quite, they weren't the same things as I was in my head. I'm like, this is not the same thing. Globally, there is an appetite for audio stories. Audio stories have a way of leaving us questions that we consciously or subconsciously try to give answers to. Audio learning and audio experiences tap into the human psyche that allows freedom of expression and also in a way for the individual to express themselves. Paukwa. Agakani Agakana. Just checking if you're there. Every storyteller needs audience participation, don't you think? How did this young man get to love stories? This young man, as I tell you this story about him, loved to consume stories and reading other people's stories. He was crazy about African history. There was the legacy of Luanda Magere, the might of Mekatalili, the wars fought between the Banyoro and the Baganda. There was the wealth of Mansa Musa. There was the grandeur of Ashanti. And there was the strength of Shaka Zulu. This young boy turned man, not too long ago, was in Paris at the Quai Branly Museum, learning about West African culture and history. But why is this young chap busy constantly learning and relearning African history? Because he wants to share this story, not just with his fellow Africans, but with the world. Because he strongly believes that we are barely scratching the surface of the stories that are coming out of this continent. Stories that speak of its rich past, its challenging and dynamic present, but its promising future. He wants to change the stories. And he thought, by writing 2 books, that he had contributed to the African storyline. He thought his world was done. Little did he know. Just over 3.5 years ago, his back started causing him havoc. He had never experienced such pain in his life. Pain that drove him to tears. He ended up at the Aga Khan hospital where he was treated for his pain. But unfortunately, 5 months later, he was back at the Aga Khan hospital where doctors found cancer. And cancer found him. He was diagnosed with a blood cancer called multiple myeloma. It affects the plasma. He called it his new normal and recognized he had been given another story to tell. But he was also clear that, just like Africa, there wasn't one single narrative to that cancer story. If you meet him now, he will say he is unapologetically happy and is eating life with a big spoon. And he's also telling people that he is grateful for the lessons that he has learned through cancer. But he recognizes that this particular story will be his scariest, it will be his hardest, and it will be his most unpredictable story that he will have to tell. But it is a story that needs to be told. It is a story that needs to be told because it will help drive out fear. It will help increase knowledge. It will create empathy. It will encourage. It will embolden people. I've lived a life where I love exchanging stories and also creating platforms where these stories can be heard or shared. My cancer diagnosis has left me different. I'm a whole new different fellow. I'm here talking to you right now. But it's shown me very many new things. My cancer story, and not just mine, but every cancer fighter or survivor will tell you that the perspective on life is different. They have been given a whole new set of eyes. This turning point in my life led me to start a little podcast called Nipe Story, as you heard earlier on, or Tell Me a Story. Nipe Story is a podcast that gives voice to Kenyan short story fiction and also African short story fiction. You should see me when I work. I get excited reading the stories, reviewing them, trying to think whose voice will go with this story, recording, editing, and coming up with the final product. It is a labor of love and a labor of thought. But I want to make sure I'm creating Mami Inosi moments to future storytellers. And I also recognize that everybody's story counts. Everybody. And there's a value in that story. It will help entertain. It will help encourage. It will help create empathy. And that story may be yours. It may be yours. It may be yours. This evening itself is a celebration of different stories. Don't be afraid of your own story. Storytelling is far from dead. But why, in this age where we're so wired up and constantly looking down and not looking up, do I believe that storytelling is important? A good story will prick your mind, stimulate your brain, touch your soul, and warm your heart, and remind you of the beauty of who we are, human. I want my stories to be part of the many stories that are coming out of Africa at this time. And I want them to reflect our reality. I want them to reflect, like what Christine said earlier, on home, this Africa that we call ours. Because I recognize this Africa is not just black. It is queer. It is diverse. It is different. It is changing. It is hip. And it is hope. It is learning and unlearning every single day. That 4.0 will happen in this continent. And in all that learning and unlearning, let us not forget that this Africa is also savannas. It is also skylines. It is also landscapes. it is also a future. This Africa is my Africa, and that is my story.